to share with you my views on the State of the Union, which I just saw, even though I hadn't planned to say anything, and it so irked me that I had to get a few things off my chest and dive into the demagoguery and sophistry that's used in the State of the Union, because we see it over and over again. So the president says that the State of the Union is great, the economy is doing great, and so he says that the participation rate is, he says the unemployment rate is very low, but he doesn't mention the participation rate, which is even more important, which is the amount actually are trying to work, is at the lowest it's been for decades. He says that the oil production has been great. Well, that's in spite of the government's policy. He put a moratorium on oil exploration. Federal permits were down really low. All this shale boom and oil production boom occurred as a result of exploring and exploiting private lands and permits. The government basically impeded it as much as possible. He has backed an EPA that tries to intervene and control the whole economy by subterfuge, by claiming that carbon dioxide is a pollutant, and therefore they can control almost every aspect of the economy, and they basically decimated the coal industry. So really, whatever success we have had is due to the entrepreneurs, the workforce, that American people are so hardworking, so ingenious, that they've been able to, in spite of all the obstacles, and I didn't think it was possible, but I'm really impressed. In spite of all the obstacles, we still have a reasonably decent economy, at least compared to the rest of the world. Now, this is very different than government policies creating the success. That's the first thing we need to say. The president wants to talk about values, and basically he equivocates when he talks about values. So for example, he says he's in favor of people getting what they deserve based on hard work, personal responsibility, but then everything he proposes are handouts. Free this, free college tuition, free special benefits for these people or those people. It's like equivocating on personal responsibility or hard work. Really, it's not, he's not using the same idea that he says he's using when he implements the policy. A good example of that is the use of equality, the word equality. He equivocates on the word equality. Equality has two different meanings. One is equality under the law. That's what our government was based on. It's based on equality under the law. That means that all people should be treated equally. That's what he says. He wants everybody to be treated equally. And that means that under the same kind of circumstance, everybody should be treated by the law, by the government, equally. But then he changes the use in the latter part of the argument to say that he's in favor of equality of condition. He wants everybody to get a more equal share. He wants to take from some people to give to others. So that's what is behind the redistribution of wealth policies that basically he's pushing all the time. So the fundamental issue in government, including this government, the one that Barack Obama is talking about, is will the government respect the individual judgment of free people, adults, when these actions and these choices do not violate other people's rights because they do not use fraud or force to achieve their ends. So if two people are not violating anybody else's rights and they aren't using force or fraud, should the government respect their agreements, their decisions? Or, as Barack Obama believes, should the government substitute its judgment for the judgment of the individuals in question, and therefore the individuals in question will not be free to decide how they want to relate to each other. The government will impose its decision. So, for example, minimum wage is a good example of this. Can the two people agree on the wage that they want? The employer wants to pay, the employee is willing to take. Barack Obama says no. He says the government will substitute their judgment, and if they don't think that wage is high enough, then the employee cannot be hired. And that is the consequence of raising minimum wage. The employee will not be hired. It will increase unemployment. It's the law of supply and demand. If you increase the price, you have less demand. If you increase the price of labor, you have less demand for labor. And anybody can understand this that wants to, but yet the president uses minimum wage as a wedge issue to try to create division where there is none. Everybody's interest should be in respecting the individual judgments of the people. Minimum wage violates that principle. So another example would be, he says that women deserve equal pay. Well, the question is, should the pay of the individuals be based on the judgment of the employer and the employee? If they agree or they don't agree. If they agree, should it be based on that agreement, or should the government come in and try to substitute its judgment for the judgment of the people involved? By the way, I don't believe that the women are being paid less when they shouldn't. If you could get, if that were true, then all the successful companies would have to do would just hire women. They do the job just as well as the men, and you don't have to pay them as much, and you make a bundle. That's not true. The truth is that these statistics are skewed, and so there's all kinds of sleight of hand in the statistics that people use to say that the women are not making as much. In a free society, that doesn't happen. How about foreign policy? Well, when it comes to foreign policy, he says that bigger nations should not bully. Oh my God, that's all that we do. Our foreign policy is based on intervening in smaller nations. We don't mess with China. We don't mess with Russia. We don't mess with any country that is powerful. We intervene in those small countries that can't defend themselves. Whether it's for a good cause or a bad cause is a different issue. But the fact is that we are leaning on countries all the time. That's the basis for our policy. We bomb whoever we want, as long as they are small nations. If they're big nations, we don't bomb them. That's right. So this is another case of hypocrisy. He's saying one thing, and in fact, what we're doing is the exact opposite. What are the solutions? Because before I finish, I want to remind you of my view of what the solutions are for our State of the Union to improve. The first thing that has to be done is you have to get rid of government lawlessness. Barack Obama has to stop trying to subvert the Constitution by trying to pass laws, by changing laws through executive decision, by ignoring the fact that in our Constitution, it's the Congress that passes the law, and then he has a right to either veto it or not. And if he doesn't veto it, then he has to respect it. He has to respect it. Once he's signed the law, he has to respect the law. He cannot change it unilaterally because he doesn't like what the Congress is doing. That is a major issue, and that'll destroy our complete system. If that degenerates, That's what a dictator is. That's what an emperor is. That's why he said he could not change immigration law on his own. Then he went ahead and did it. He said he couldn't change the Affordable Care Act, but then he did it. So if he thinks that he can, on his own, through executive order, just change laws, our whole system is destroyed. He has to recognize the fact that we have separation of powers. He taught constitutional law. He knows this. And he has said one thing at one time and then something else at another time. So government lawlessness, that'll destroy your society. That'll just create a tyrant, an emperor, a king, or a dictator, however you want to call him. Now, what's the other thing that we need to do? We need to get rid of all those victimless crimes. And, you know, crimes against prostitution, against smoking marijuana, against all these things that are not violating anybody's rights because they are not using force or fraud to require people to do something. They're doing it voluntarily. The people are smoking the marijuana voluntarily. By the way, a little message to Mr. O'Reilly: using drugs, whatever drugs they are not violent acts. To ingest a drug is not violence. It has nothing to do with force. It is not a violent act to either sell it or ingest it or consume it. There's no violence, there's no force involved. That's why it has to be respected, whether you think they're using good judgment or not. If you are willing to respect the judgment of your citizens, if they aren't violating anybody else's rights. If you aren't, then you have taken on to yourself the idea of tyranny, that it's okay to impose by force your judgment, regardless of what the individuals in question think. The third thing, which the speech was full of, is redistribution of wealth. This is his solution for everything. He wants to spend money on this, infrastructure jobs, on these jobs, on the other jobs. He wants to give subsidies to some companies and exempt them from payment in others. He wants to intervene. He wants to use the tax code to favor some citizens against others. He wants to redistribute wealth. That means he's not the property right of the person who produced the wealth, the person who produced the property, who produced the money. And he's saying, no, no, you cannot use your judgment to decide how to use all your money. You have to give it to this guy. Why? Because I passed a law requiring you to. The fourth thing that we need to do is stop the interventionist policy and only use military force when we are attacked or an imminent threat of attack, and stop getting involved in these wars all around the world. And this whole war on terrorism, which is just a metaphor, it's really not a war. It's just individual criminals that commit criminal actions should be caught and prosecuted and punished. And sometimes in some situations you may have to engage them and kill them, but the preferred thing to do is treat them like all criminals, catch them, give them a trial, see if they're really guilty. If they are, punish them. That's what we should do. Now, to top it off, the epitome of hypocrisy is that Barack Obama says that the politicians there in that assembly, there in the Congress, should not be partisan. You mean not be partisan like him? That's really funny. That is the kettle calling the pot black, or vice versa, whichever you want to choose. Right? Thanks for listening, and let me know what you think.